film, I remind everyone please speak directly into the microphone so that you can be clearly heard and seen. The Planning Committee is not a public meeting, but a meeting to which the public is invited. All attendees must comply with the ruling of the chair. They must not interrupt the meeting or cause undue disturbance. To support this, please switch off your mobile phones or select silent mode for the duration of the meeting. And those using Teams, please ensure microphones are on mute and your device volume is set to 0 to maintain audio quality. Only those who have registered to speak in accordance with the speaking protocol will be invited to address the committee, maximum of 3 minutes. No material is to be circulated to members of the committee. We have 6 planning applications to determine today. The case officer will be invited to present the report and recommendations. Next, I will invite members of the public who have registered to speak to address the committee in the following order: public against, public who support, the applicant or agent, town, parish council, and ward members. Each speaker has 3 minutes. Please come to the small table at the front, over there. Speak clearly into the microphone, which you turn on by pressing the right-hand side button and then press again to turn off when finished. Following public speaking, the planning officers will have the opportunity to address any salient points they wish to clarify, and committee members will be given the opportunity to ask questions of the planning officers before moving on to debate. When we go into councillor questions and debate for the benefit of the public watching, can the members state their name when addressing the meeting, always directing comments via the chair? I will invite members to speak in turn. At the end of the debate, I will take the vote by a show of hands. The voting detail will be recorded in the minutes if 3 or more members make the necessary request. Now, I will move on to the agenda. Okay, item number 1 is apologies. And today we have received apologies from Councillor Les Fry and Councillor David Taylor. Item 2, declarations of interest to disclose any pecuniary, any registrable or non-registrable interest as set out in the adopted code of conduct. In making their disclosure, councillors are asked to state the agenda item, the nature of the interest, any action they propose to take as part of their declaration. Required, further advice should be sought from the monitoring officer in advance of the meeting. Do we have any declarations of interest from any members? Next item is item 3, minutes. We just need to confirm the minutes of the meeting. Tuesday, 16th of July 2024. Can we approve by a show of hands? Thank you. So that's accepted. Registration for public speaking and statements. Members of the public wishing to speak to the committee on a planning application should notify the Democratic Services Officer listed on the front of this agenda. This must be done no later than 2 clear working days before the meeting. Please refer to the guide to public speaking at Planning Committee. The deadline for notifying a request to speak is 8:30 AM on Friday, 30th of July, 2024. Today, we have 6 applications to,
The deadline was
sorry,
Friday this week, so that would have been Friday.
yes, the deadline has just passed, being this last Friday. Thank you, Megan. Today, we have 6 applications to consider. It's a very rough guide. I think each will take around 30 minutes each, but they could easily be longer or shorter. We don't actually really know. I think that we are likely to take a break after around the 3rd application, given that the 4th looks like it might take longer. I'm running the meeting so that we do not exceed 3 hours without a break. I'll let you know about that as the meeting progresses. Now, introductions. I'm just going to state who the officers are involved today. We have Hannah Smith, Area Manager for North, Claire Lewis, Planning Officer, Alex Skidmore, Lead Project Officer, Stephen Banks, Planning Officer, Hannah Massey, our lawyer, sitting to my left, Megan Rochester, Democratic Services Officer, and Joshua Kennedy, Democratic Services Officer. We also have Alistair Kendall, Project Engineer. I think with that, we're ready to move on to our first planning application, which is P/FUL/2024/01509, which is the Stables, Longmead, Melway Lane, Child Oakford, Blandford Forum, DT11 ATW. And this is going to be presented by Claire Lewis. And it is about the erection of a garage and plant room. It's being brought to the committee as concerns were raised by the Parish Council. There are 2 speakers for this application. So Claire, please could you go ahead with the presentation? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So as the Chair just mentioned, this application comes before members following a scheme of delegation referral, whereby one councillor requested a committee decision and the 2 other notified councillors did not respond. The nominated officer then decided on balance that the application should be brought to committee members today due to objections received from the council, the parish, and neighbours. This proposal seeks to erect a garage and plant room at the address on the screen, which is a site that received approval in 2022 to demolish the existing stable block and erect a single 1.5-storey dwelling. The site is located on the outskirts of the village of Child Oakford, northwest of Blandford Forum. The application site is shown outlined in red on the map on the screen. It's located on a spur off Melway Lane on the southern outskirts of the village, approximately 200 metres south of the Child Oakford settlement boundary. The nearest boundary of the Dorset National Landscape, formerly known as the AONB, lies approximately 75 metres to the east, and there is a network of right-of-way footpaths and bridleways close to the site that can be seen in red and purple. The closest of which is the footpath N3536, which follows the northern boundary of the site, just here, and then the bridleway N3547 to the east. There are several protected trees around the site, and the northeastern of which is under the control of the applicant. These are shown by the black dots. And there's an expanse of ancient woodland approximately 170 metres south. The eastern half of the site falls within an area considered at risk of groundwater flooding. The subject of the application is a site with planning permission for a detached bungalow, which would occupy a central position within the curtilage, as shown here. And this proposal is to erect a separate building in the northeastern corner that would house a garage and a plant room. The proposed outbuilding would utilise much of the site of the original stable block and be largely concealed by existing trees, hedgerow and other vegetation. The principle of erecting a detached building to house a garage and plant room incidental to the main dwelling is acceptable in accordance with policy 28 of the North Dorset local plan, which relates to existing dwellings in the countryside, and also to policy CO13 of the Child Oakford Village Design Statement, relates to subservient ancillary buildings. PD rights on the site were removed by way of condition number 7 when permission was granted for the detached dwelling in May 2022. And as such, planning permission is now required for the erection of the proposed outbuilding. And for clarity, imposing that condition to remove the permitted development rights was to ensure that the scale and the design of any additional development on the site could be closely monitored and managed, rather than to just prevent all future development. These images show the scale and its impact. As can be seen from the floor plan on the right of the screen, the main body of the proposed outbuilding comprises a double garage, with a much smaller section jutting out from the south elevation, which will be utilised as a plant room to house equipment required for the property to function off-grid. The elevations on the left show the scale of the building with its 2 dual-pitched roofs at differing heights, both of which would sit lower than the approved main dwelling, ensuring the outbuilding remains subservient. For the first set of submitted plans, the finished floor level of the garage and plant room was about 40 centimetres lower than the floor of the existing stable block. And then following discussions with the agent and his clients, it was also agreed that the overall height of the building should be reduced from the original plans by a total of 80 centimetres. So it went from 5.2 metres down to 4.4 as in the current application. And the combination of these two factors will ensure that any visual impact resulting from the proposed development is as minimal as possible. And in contrast to the permitted dwelling, which is shown in these images, the planning permission granted for the dwelling on the site will stand at a height of 6.7 metres to the ridge with an eaves height of 3.2. So the proposed garage building is considerably smaller in height as well as footprint and will therefore be subservient to the principal dwelling. The structure is proposed to be constructed of materials to match and complement the approved main dwelling. So the plinth base walls will be clad with oldie watermill brick slips as pictured here. The external walls and doors will be clad with charred timber, and the chosen shade is the lightest level available, which allows the natural grain of the wood and the natural colours of the timber to be seen through the charring. The roof will be laid to Spanish slate tiles to match the main dwelling. And all the materials have been chosen to complement the main dwelling and the rural setting. There's no glazing proposed to ensure that the building conveys an agrarian feel and does not result in any glare, allowing it to disappear into its surroundings. The proposed security lighting will be installed in 2 locations shown here. Just above the garage and side access doors, the models chosen are motion sensor downlights that will only activate when humans in close proximity during the hours of darkness, and they will emit a warm white light of 3000 kelvins or less. They're designed to not be activated by animals, and the low light temperature should ensure minimal disruption to wildlife and the AONB. This slide shows impacts on amenity. There's no demonstrable impact on neighbouring properties or neighbouring amenity, as the nearest neighbour is 98 metres north of the proposed dwelling. The site itself is well screened from Melway Lane, and the proposed building would be positioned in the northwest corner of the site, surrounded by tall, mature trees and hedgerows. The choice of building materials ensures it softens into the landscape, and the lowered roof pitch is both subservient to the approved main dwelling and lower than the existing boundary treatments. The proposed outbuilding will provide uses incidental to the main dwelling, such as dry storage of vehicles, garden equipment, and other domestic storage, along with a small 8.6 metre square area that will house plants to support off-grid living, as mentioned. The building will ensure that bulky plant equipment does not need to be housed inside the relatively small 2-bedroom dwelling that's already been approved. Impacts on the landscape. the proposed garage and plant room will be partially visible from some nearby rights of way through small gaps in the hedges surrounding the site. This is particularly during winter and spring when there's lower leaf coverage, but it's considered that the overall impact of the building will be negligible. And the more distant views from Hambledon Hill and Hod Hill will see the garage and plant room against a backdrop of natural screening, whilst the modest scale design and use of materials will ensure the appearance would not be contrary to the rural nature of its site. And this is shown in the following images taken from Hambledon Hill, from the same spot, which show the location of the stables site, which it was taken about 760 metres from the proposed development, halfway up Hambledon Hill. You can see, sorry, I'm just moving this down. The main settlement of Child Oakford can be seen on the right-hand side. And then you can also see the stable block of the neighbouring Melway House, which is the nearest application site. And that stable block can quite clearly be seen from this vantage point on Hambledon Hill, whereas the stable site is very well screened. This is a zoomed in image taken from the same location. The wider settlement of Child Oakford disappears behind these trees and the stable site remains concealed. But again, Melway House's stable block remains a dominant part of the view, along with distant agricultural buildings and small settlements. And finally, zoomed in even further, you can see that there's a small gap in the hedge at the stable site here, but again, very well concealed with all of the existing vegetation. Despite the gap in the hedge, the remainder of the site and the location of the approved dwelling and proposed outbuildings cannot be seen. And this is a photo taken from a different location, the field gates on the C14 Child Oakford to Hanford Road. Again, the site of the approved and proposed development cannot be seen due to the multiple field hedges and mature trees. From these photos and other evidence provided, it can be concluded that the impact of the proposed development on the landscape, rural views, and the Dorset National Landscape will be negligible. And from most vantage points, there'll be no impact at all. There's a negligible potential for risk to barn owls and bats, and biodiversity enhancements will be carried out on site in accordance with the Biodiversity Mitigation Enhancement Scheme, which was provided with the application. And trees on the site will be protected with an arboricultural method statement, which includes an arboricultural consultant on site to monitor at certain points during construction to ensure that there's no damage to trees. The surface material that was approved with the existing application, or the previous application for the main dwelling, was a Hoggin surface material. And this has actually been changed to a more appropriate gravel surface, which will ensure even greater protection to existing trees on site. So there has been an improvement to materials proposed and approved in the earlier application. There's no demonstrable flood risk on site, and a soakaway is proposed to discharge surface runoff from the proposed outbuilding and the approved dwelling. In terms of highways, parking, access, additional covered parking will be created as a result of the double garage, which is a positive thing, and then access will remain as approved, and there's no demonstrable risk to highway safety in accordance with Dorset Highways. So in summary, officers have not identified any demonstrable impact on character and appearance, amenity, landscape, biodiversity, flood risk, or highway safety that would justify refusal. The proposals are judged to accord with the North Dorset Local Plan and the Child Oakford Village Design Statement and all relevant sections of the NPPF, and we therefore recommend approval. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Could I please ask Stephen Gracer, the applicant, to speak for 3 minutes? right-hand button. It's a right-hand button.
Presenting applicant. Like no. The office. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start again. Hopefully we'll survive this stuff. Yes, I represent the applicant, Mr. Clive Knight. The officer's report and presentation fully describes the characteristics and impact of the proposal. Includes its fully compliant national local planning policies. The objections received cover a range of issues.
We're not having a good time with these.
Objections received cover a range of issues. Some are relevant and some not, and all have been addressed in the officer's report. My client bought the site as a home for him and his family to live in, to become part of the local community, not speculative development. Primary attraction is the potential for off-grid living, which requires facilities not present in most houses. Plant renewable equipment, solar batteries, and all the control systems needed to make the home as energy efficient as possible. And being within the building, this equipment, the noise from this equipment will be minimised. The garage, as has been explained, will be used for car parking, storage, will enable all the normal domestic clutter to be hidden in view. As the report explains, the garage and plant room is subservient to the dwelling. Its scale and size is appropriate to the site and to my client's needs. The height has been reduced through negotiation, is acceptable, and is significantly less than a 2000 approval elsewhere along Manway Lane. The floor level will be the same as the dwelling, which is 0.4 metres lower than the former stables on the site. The materials match those already approved for the dwelling, and the building will not result in additional traffic or noise, and there have been no objections from the highway officer. Measures to protect the tree preservation over oak tree are in place, and my client will work with the council's tree officer to protect and secure the longevity of the oak tree. Garage and plant room will be visually more attractive than the former stables and does not amount to inappropriate development. The site is surrounded by mature hedges, but these have not been maintained for years. Hedges overgrown with nettles and brambles, and where these have been cleared on parts of the hedgerow, there are gaps as a result. Some 30 hazel whips have been planted to infill these gaps and to hopefully restore the hedge. Through proper hedge maintenance, the visual impact of the building will be minimised. As highlighted in the report, the site cannot be readily seen from Hampden Hill.
15 seconds left.
Views from use of the Wrights Way network are limited. Both the house and the garage and plant room will be built concurrently, which will reduce disruption. And as outlined in the officer's report and presentation, there are no material planning considerations or policy objections, and the officer's recommendation that the application is approved subject to conditions is welcome and should be endorsed by this committee.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Please could I ask Councillor Barbara Ireland to speak?
Thank you for the opportunity to comment on this application. Parish Council would like to draw the committee's attention to the history of the site and the planning conditions that were put on the existing consent for what is a very modest dwelling house. Consent for this small dwelling was granted despite the fact that it was against pre-application advice given to the applicant by both the planning officers. That advice was that it conflicted with several planning policies. It was an isolated location. The development could set a precedent for an urbanised ribbon of development, which, given the rural character of the area, would not be welcomed. The officer went on to say that it would have a detrimental impact on the setting of the AONB by virtue of its urbanisation of a sparsely developed rural position. Subsequently, permission was granted at committee in May 2022, due primarily to Dorset's lack of cloud housing supply and on the tilted balance argument. However, because of its very sensitive location, that permission was conditioned to ensure that the impact of the dwelling would be minimised and controlled. Most significantly, an unequivocal planning condition was applied, precluding any further intensification of the use of the site. It reads, no garages, sheds or other outbuildings permitted by Class C Schedule 2.1 of 2015 order shall be erected or constructed. Reason, to protect amenity and the character of the area. This condition was recommended, supported and approved by planning officers, the head of planning and councillors at the committee. Parish Council believes that this was a very clear statement of Dorset Council's position. It precludes garages, sheds or other outbuildings on this site. It clearly intends that development should be restricted to that permitted. It does not invite further applications for these developments. Importantly, there have been no changes in development plan policy or the local circumstances, which now warrant Dorset Council taking a different view. This application would further intensify built domestic development and activity in open countryside with some 200 metres outside the village settlement boundary. Taking into account all the public and parish council objections to this and previous applications on the site, it would be unreasonable and unjust to permit such development, as identified in that pre-application advice given by the council several years ago. We believe this application should be refused. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, what I'd like to do is to have members of the committee ask questions of the officer. So I can start from my left with Councillor Rideout. So if you could please ask a question if you have one.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a little question. Belinda Rideout, Gillingham Ward. Reading through some of the objections to this proposal, there were concerns about the visibility from the public right-of-way N35, N47. Could you just maybe get the map up so we can have a look? And is there going to be any additional planting proposed to cover any gaps to reduce that visibility?
Just go ahead, Claire.
I think it's the bridleway to the east that you were referring to. One here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
N3547.
Yeah. So that's this one to the east. I think as Stephen Grazer mentioned, there's already been some additional planting undertaken to fill some of the gaps in the hedgerow. But there is no additional proposed planting in the actual application, but some has already happened. And so in terms of the views from this location, as was shown in the maps, in the photographs that I showed on the screen earlier, much of the site is sort of heavily surrounded by trees and hedges. So there's very little visibility other than in those small gaps, which have largely been planted already, but it will obviously take some time for that planting to take hold, fill the gaps.
Okay.
And I would say that the applicant is very much on board with ensuring that it remains a very concealed site. And it's in their interest as well as in the interest of the local community of which he wants to become a part of.
Okay, thank you. I ask Councillor Jeans if you have a question.
No questions, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Apothecary?
No questions.
No question.
Thank you. No question,
Councillor
thank you.
Jesperson? Councillor Vitali?
Thanks, Chair. Just a brief one from me. I just wanted to ask about this question of the PDR and their removal, and also the intentions behind the previous plan decision. We've heard that maybe the intention of that was not to rule out the principle of improvements in the future, that it was about control of it by the council. But we've also heard from the testimony today that the intention was clear in another way, that it was about protecting local amenity and the sparsely developed nature of the area. So I just wondered if there's anything more you had to say that's material for our discussions today on that topic.
Yes, go ahead.
I think we feel strongly that there is no intensification of the site, that it will remain a 2-bedroom property with an associated outbuilding incidental to its use. And yeah, I don't think, I wasn't actually an employee of the council at the point at which the original house was given permission. But it's my understanding that the permitted development rights were removed just purely to ensure that we could have some control over what was built. Otherwise, under Class E, multiple outbuildings could have been added to the site, covering up to 50% of the remaining curtilage. And this will ensure that does not happen, and that a site for the outbuilding has been chosen that is in the most concealed position on the site. We had control over reducing the height of the roofs, both of the ridges of the upper and the lower roof. So I think that was sort of the intention from a planning officer's perspective, at least, behind adding that condition to the 2022 permission.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jones? No. Councillor Wood?
Yes, thank you. I would just like to ask a question. A lot has been placed on the importance of screening by trees. I'm just curious, like in winter, for example, when the trees are a bit less full, is that taken into account when we're talking about tree coverage? And also, with this application, will we be conditioning again no further development, or is that now not going to be part of the application? Thank you.
To answer that.
Yes, go ahead, please, Hannah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. Yes, thank you, Councillor. The impact will be different in winter from summer. So the photo you have here is obviously trees in full leaf. I think we have to bear in mind that this is taken at a considerable distance and it is zoomed in. So it's not an accurate depiction of what you'd see from that viewpoint. So you must bear that in mind when we look at this photograph. Secondly, I think there will be more visibility of the building around the site from the immediate footpaths and bridleways and further away in winter. But officers don't consider that would be harmful because of the distances from the footpath and the fact that it is an ancillary building in connection with the main house, which also has an impact. And overall, that impact is not considered to be unacceptable in summer or winter. Sorry, Councillor, was the second question about whether we had to reapply permitted development rights?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, no, we do not need to because it runs the main house. We don't have to reimpose the removal of the permitted development rights on outbuildings because that would remain on the original permission and still ensure that those impacts that Claire's described wouldn't happen in terms of extra outbuildings being constructed without planning permission. So we still have that control.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Major, do you have a question?
No questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask the local ward member, Councillor Jesperson, to start the debate and start the discussion?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Sherry Jesperson, Hillforts and Upper Clarence Ward. Mr. Chairman, colleagues, I don't think that this application is quite as simple and straightforward as it is perhaps being presented here. The committee did indeed give this application permission back in April 22, in spite of the fact that we were aware that there had been pre-development advice that it was against it. At that time, the 5-year house, we didn't have the 5-year housing land supply, and the tilted balance was in play, and it would have been extremely difficult to, in fact, this committee knew it was extremely difficult to refuse that or any other application. The committee, however, was given some comfort by the fact that it was a very small building. The decision was absolutely marginal at the time. It could have gone either way, but in the end, the committee was persuaded by the fact that it was a very small building, 2-story, 1.5 stories high, 2 bedrooms, tiny little building. And it was in this context precisely that the committee determined to remove the permitted development rights. And my understanding of that the intention of that committee action differs slightly from the officers. I can't agree that this doesn't offer any intensification of the site. The condition clearly excluded garages and sheds, and I remember that debate very well. And it was precisely to avoid this application coming back to Dorset Council, to this committee, to add to the development to the buildings on this site. So the committee saw this coming and did everything it could to avoid that. And that's the context in which those permitted developments were removed, as was made very clear, I think, by the presentation we've just heard from the parish council. This site is outside the settlement boundary. It's very close to the AONB. There is no real justification. There's no change in this development than there was back when we gave it permission to justify removing that permitted development rights, overriding the clear intentions of the committee, supported, I might say, by planning case officers and by the head of planning at the time. And so I'm just very uncomfortable about this application. I think that we really should be turning this down, but I will listen to the debate, because that was the intention of the committee before. That was the context, the background in which we gave it permission.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, people get very uncomfortable when they see, and I'm not for the moment suggesting that the extremely honourable resident who wants to do this is doing this, but this is perceived as gaming the planning system. And this is what we really need to avoid. That's what the committee is here to protect the local
Can we
community from.
move on? I expect that other people need to speak. Can I ask Councillor Jones whether you would like to make a point? Okay, thank you. I'll go around the table. Councillor Major, you have a point?
Thank you, Chair. I take Councillor Jesperson's comments into account, but the existing stable block, as we've been told and presented, is higher than the proposed building or garage, and its materials to the new the new garage links to the existing dwelling. Personally, I don't have any issue with it. I think it's going to be less of an effect or on the view from the footpaths, etc., than it currently is potentially.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wood?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be like a stickler for the rules, but outside settlement boundary, there was a condition, no further development. I think, for consistency, and to kind of give weight to the rules that we're setting here, or the conditions we're setting, stick to those rules, and we have to stick to those conditions. Otherwise, they basically don't make any sense.
Thank you. Councillor Vitali?
Chair, yes, this point about the intent of the original permission less clear in my mind now, and that's unfortunate. My gut, I think people will know that I rarely disagree with Councillor Jespersen, but on this case, it seems like a proportionate proposal. And in terms of the balance of our considerations today, it would make a material benefit to the families and, you know, intending to live in the home. They've taken on board comments and they've changed the proposal accordingly. Its pitches are lower than the main building, and I'm minded to support it. But I take entirely Councillor Jesperson's points about concerns about gaming the system. It would just be great if we could have slightly more clarity on the original plan decision. I was looking for the documentation here, but I couldn't quite find it.
Okay, thank you for that. So yes, Hannah, the one of the officers would like to make a comment. Yes, please go ahead.
The removal of permitted development rights.
Yeah.
Thank you. So yeah, the condition was attached by the committee, and it is an important condition, and it was justified in that location because of the sensitivities of the site, because it's in the setting of the national landscape, and it's in the rural. It was on the rural edge of the village. So to remove permitted development rights, we need good justification, because we can't remove permitted development rights from any development without it being justified. So in this instance, it was justified. But that, whatever the understanding about that condition is, those conditions that remove permitted development rights aren't a condition that says no to no further development. They're a condition that says that the normal permitted development rights that apply cannot be exercised, and a planning application must be submitted. That must be duly considered in accordance with the policies that we have. So I think we need to be clear that the policy, the condition was required, and we could justify that through our policy, but the condition was not saying there shall be no further development, because conditions that remove permitted development rights can't do that. What we can do is have close scrutiny of applications when they come to committee, whether they require planning permission anyway, or their development that would have been permitted development, should we have not, removed the permitted development rights. In this instance, any other outbuilding on this site would require planning permission still. So you've got the situation where you could quite easily have 2 cars on this site, using the site, parking there. Same level of intensity of use if you have them garaged on the site with a small store. So in terms of when we talk about intensification, there's more built form on the site, which has a different impact, but the use doesn't change of that dwelling, because it has a certain capacity, being a fairly modest 2-bedroomed building. So I think we just need to caution around saying that condition could completely remove any opportunity for further outbuildings, but at the same time understanding the intention of the committee to protect the area because of its sensitivities, landscape sensitivities, and it being on the rural edge of the village.
Okay, thank you for that. So go back to Councillor Vitali.
If I may, very briefly, Chair, in which case the intent of the removal of the PDR was to ensure scrutiny over future improvements to the site. I think that intention has been entirely fulfilled in the course of this application. The application has been modified as a result of it, and what they've come back with is seems to be extremely reasonable.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Apothecary, would you like to
Thank you,
make a
Chairman.
point?
I'm still wrestling with this one.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rideout.
Belinda Rideout, Gillingham Ward. I remember this application well, and the reason why we conditioned the permitted development removal, and this has brought this application forward. When you look at it on plan, yes, the actual footprint does look large compared to the house, the dwelling that's already approved, but through negotiation, the ridge height has been reduced. Materials are sympathetic to the host dwelling, is subservient, and I'm hoping with additional planting will not be viewed, the proposal won't be viewed from near further away. So given all that's, I've heard everything, read through the report, on balance, I would be happy to propose that we approve the application.
Okay, thank you. Could I ask Councillor Jones, please?
Yes. I think the issue has come, I think in future, when we're looking at permitted development and so on,
perhaps we shouldn't say and no garages and no sheds, et cetera, because I think that's what has caused the issue here. If we had just said permitted developments have been reviewed, you know, being on this site, I think that would be easier than stating no garages, no sheds, no nothing else on any future application. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that then. So are we now ready to go to a vote with this? So please can we, councillors, please could you vote if you're in favour? So I have 6 in favour. Those against? So we have 3 against. So therefore, planning permission has been granted for this application. Thank you very much. So now we move to agenda item 7, which is P/2024/03162. Is 2A Mill Lane, Charminster, DT29QP. This will be presented by Claire Lewis. It's a first floor extension, including a change of materials. Permission has already been granted. It's been brought to the committee as the applicant is an employee of Dorset Council. There are no speakers registered for this application. So Claire, could you please go ahead? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. So as mentioned, the application comes before us today because the applicant is an employee of Dorset Council and works within the Place Directorate. The proposal seeks to vary condition 2 of the existing planning permission for a first floor extension over garage, new dormer window and associated works. Variation seeks to amend some of the external wall and roof materials following a PD inquiry, permitted development inquiry, which confirmed that the changes were not allowed under general permitted development legislation. The site is located on the outskirts of the village of Child Oakford, northwest of Blandford Forum. The application site shown here is outlined in red. It's located centrally. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it's in Charminster. The village of Charminster. Luckily, it's the right map. So the application here in red is located centrally within the village on the eastern edge of the conservation area, which is shown here in dotted blue. There's a Grade 2 listed property neighbouring the site known as Yew House. As outlined in the officer report, a large quantity of vegetation delineates the plot, which with a tree situated on the boundary between the proposal site and listed Yew House. No harm to the listed asset was identified when the original planning permission was granted on the site in 2022, and it's not considered that the changes to the external materials proposed in this variation of condition would result in any harm either. Subject to the application is a detached 1.5-storey dwelling with integrated garage set in a large plot with open fields and a right-of-way footpath to the side and rear. So this is open fields to the north, and then the footpath runs down the eastern side. The proposed variations to the existing permission are to change the roof material from concrete pan tiles as existing to grey slate, to alter the external wall finishing on the southwest and northwest elevations from brick as existing to a cream or white render, and also to alter the approved dormer roof material from zinc to grey single ply membrane. The proposed change to the dormer material is primarily due to the high cost of zinc, and single ply membrane is a typical alternative that looks very similar from a distance that anyone would ever see it from, and is considered acceptable by our conservation officers. From these elevations, comparing the approved with the proposed, This is the existing approved application, and these are the proposed elevations. You can see that the proposed changes only affect some of the external finishes, but this results in an overall impact on the character of the property and its amenity value. It's worth noting here that the work has already begun on the improved plans, including removal of the rear roofscape to make way for the new dormer. And during these works, it was discovered that the existing concrete roof tiles are no longer fit for purpose. The tiles were not found to be in a reusable condition, and the proposed replacement slate will be watertight and have a much improved thermal efficiency. There are several examples of similar materials used in the immediate area. So number 1, Mill Lane, is a historic property with slate on both the main roof and the pitched porch roof, and the front elevation is finished in a white lime render. Number 8, Mill Lane, is an older style semi-detached cottage finished in white painted render. And number 14, Mill Lane, is another historic property where the concrete Pantile roof has recently been replaced with slate and the frontage has been rendered. The neighbouring cob thatch cottage can also be seen here to have a white rendered front elevation. From these examples, it can be drawn that slate and render are typical of the local vernacular and are sympathetic to the character and the setting of the conservation area. This is the site of the proposed development. The front elevation is existing prior to any recent works that have happened in accordance with the approved planning permission. Shows the existing brick walls and concrete Pantile roof. And this image to the side shows the slate roof of the neighbouring coach house, which is now an annex to Grade 2 listed U House. This conversion was approved in 2016 under the application number on the screen. So there is a slate roof immediately adjacent to the property. This photo is taken from the public right-of-way footpath S14/2, which runs behind the house. Part of the roof and the southeast elevation are visible from this viewpoint. The southeast elevation is proposed to remain brick as existing on here, and the change of roof material to slate is not considered to cause any harm to amenity or to the character of the conservation area when viewed from this perspective. So on the screen are the summaries and the recommendation, which is to grant planning permission. So in summary, officers have not identified any demonstrable impact on character, appearance, amenity, heritage assets or biodiversity that would justify refusal, and the proposals are judged to accord with the North Dorset local plan, policies ENV 3, 4, 10, sorry, West Dorset, ENV 10, 3, 4, 10 and 16, and we therefore recommend approval. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Committee members, does anyone have any questions about the presentation?
Yes, sorry.
Oh, yes, Councillor James, please go ahead.
There was an objection from the neighbour, Mr. Woodcock, 3 Greenacre, and he was concerned about a dormer window affecting his privacy. Are you able to give us sort of a view of where his property is compared to the applicant's?
Yes, answer that, Claire.
Yes, so that objection appeared to relate to the now approved conversion and front dormer, because that property actually is to the front of this development, and the dormer window has already been approved under the previous development. If it was to the rear, then it might be different, but no, it doesn't affect this application.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I think we should go into the debate. Does anyone have something? Councillor Jesperson?
This looks an eminently reasonable, sensible proposal, entirely acceptable, and without wishing to preclude any further debate, I'd be happy to propose this.
Councillor Jones, please. Councillor Vitale. Okay, sorry, I thought you put your hand up. No worries, Councillor Vitale, go ahead.
Be delighted to second, Chair.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. So we've got a proposer and a seconder. Please, can we go to a vote? So those in favour? Excellent. I think that's unanimous. So therefore, permission is granted for P/VOC/2024/03162. So now we move on to agenda item number 8, which is P/VOC/2024/01076, Frogmore Lane, Sixpenny Handley, Dorset, SP5 5NY. This is going to be presented by Hannah Smith. It concerns 7 new dwellings. Permission is already granted. Area. It's being brought to the committee as there are concerns from the local parish about flooding and drainage. There are 4 speakers registered for this application. Please go ahead with the presentation.
This application is a variation of condition application to make changes to condition 2, 9, 10 and 12 of the original planning application. It does have the effect of granting new planning application, but the principle of the development has been established and the 7 dwellings have been granted consent. This is in our East Plan area on the edge of Sixpenny Handley, which is one of the larger villages in the East Dorset area. See the site here outlined in red. So the site will be here where my pointer is. And there's also drainage works that relate to this area of the land here outside the site, which you will see on my following slides. So this is the layout that's been granted planning permission. You can see that they're all bungalows located off of this spine road that runs through the site. The development locates the dwellings outside of the risk of flooding, and there's detailed hydrology conditions and requirements that Alistair will be able to speak more about than me if any questions are raised on that matter. This is the proposed amendments to the layout. Every unit would have a slight change in floor area, which varies. The largest alteration would be to plot 2, which is located here, which would have an increase of 23.5 square metres. Some of the other dwellings would have a smaller increase. This totals approximately just under 40 square metres of additional built form across the site compared to the original proposal, the last consent that we issued on the site. In terms of the other changes, there is a change to this plot here, Unit 7, which would have render, just checking it is plot 7 on my notes, sorry. 6 would be rendered, apologies. Plot 6 would be rendered rather than brickwork, but this is considered to be an acceptable material and acceptable change. There's also a slight decrease in the pitch of the roof from 40 degrees to 35 degrees, which does result in a small decrease in the overall ridge height of the dwellings. There's no greater impact there. You can just see the orange line of the previous application here. So in terms of the hydrology, which is one of the main concerns of locals and the parish council, that remains pretty much the same. There's a lot of work that's been gone into ensuring that the site itself will be safe during the lifetime of the development, and also crucially, the development doesn't make flooding worse elsewhere. There is flooding around the site. The lane, I'll show you a photo a bit later on, there's a lane that does flood this location here. But the access to the site is over here, so occupiers of the dwellings wouldn't have to drive through floodwater on this lane here, which does suffer from flooding, and there's no doubt there are flooding and hydrology issues in the wider area. What we have to be concerned about is that the development's safe and it doesn't make flooding worse elsewhere, which is what Alistair's been looking at. this is the broad drainage strategy here outlined on this map, on this plan. And there is some work to the channel across the site, which runs across the site, to improve it and to improve the flow of where the water goes across the site. This is a profile of the drainage channel here, and the improvements to it, the typical proposed ditch here. In terms of the resulting flood risk of the site, you can see that this is managed through the channel here and the area of floodplain here, which would still be susceptible to flooding. But as I said previously, the principle of the development has been established. So we're not looking at the principle here, we're looking at the changes and how they may impact the slight increase in floor print of the dwellings and the changes to the materials and the ridge height. So just looking at some photographs of the site, the site has commenced. So you can see the slabs in on some of these dwellings, because there is planning permission to erect the dwellings, but not obviously for these changes that are being sought at the moment. So you can see the surrounding dwellings here. And just another picture across the site showing how the dwellings would be located with the floor slabs that have gone in there. And this is a picture of the drainage ditch across the site where the water's channeled. Sorry. And this is a photograph of the lane that bounds the site but doesn't form part of the access, where you can see there are high groundwater levels in the area and there is surface water flooding around the highway. But the development itself, this is outside of the development site itself. In terms of the policy context, the most relevant policy in the East Dorset plan is policy Chase 7, land adjoining Frogmore Lane. As I've said, the principle of development has been established, but the key obviously is that F here, that the site still needs to be safe, and there needs to be an acceptable drainage solution which protects features of special nature conservation and protects housing on the site from flooding. It ensures that there's no increase of flooding to other land buildings. This variation condition would be conditioned in the same way as the original consent, and those same conditions would be reattached that were attached to the original grant of consent. Moving on to the recommendation, it's considered the location is sustainable and it's acceptable in terms of its design and visual impact. There would not be any significant harm to landscape character or the national landscape AONB or on neighbouring residential amenity. Development can manage its own water runoff and would not increase the risk of flooding elsewhere. Development proposals accord with the development plan, and there are no material considerations which would warrant refusal of the application. And therefore, the application is recommended to grant, subject to conditions set out in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Hannah. Please, could I ask Stuart McLean to speak, please? Currently objecting to this application. Minutes.
My name is Stuart McLean. I live in Frogmore Lane, in Frogmore Farmhouse in the Sixpenny Handley. I speak as a member of the public whose property is adjacent to the Frogmore Lane development site. I've lived in Frogmore Farmhouse for 29 years, in which time Frogmore Lane and its adjacent meadow have been the subject of a combination of surface and groundwater flooding on average every 3 years. The meadow on which Lord Homes are developing their houses is in a floodplain and identified by the Environment Agency. Meadow's location is at the lowest point of the village and at times of extreme inclemency acts as a sump to the combined effect of ground and surface water. Inside my house is a well of 4 feet in diameter, in which the water level today is visible at 80 feet below ground level. When the underground aquifers fill with groundwater at times of heavy rain, the level in the well rises to the very top, and this, combined with heavy surface water, rainwater runoff from the roadways in Sixpenny Handley, runs down Frogmore Lane into the meadow at its junction with Back Lane, flooding the lower half of the field in which Lord Homes are siting specifically 2 houses and a garage. And I have photographs of this part of the field in 2013 showing that area under 2 feet of water despite your diagram. It should be recalled that a similar plan to develop this site was entered in 1992, which was refused planning permission by the then East Dorset District Council, which the developer appealed. The Secretary of State's inspector subsequently upheld the planning development refusal on the grounds of flooding. I submit that nothing has changed since those times to alter the same fact that the inspector considered in 1992. The groundwater risks and the impact on this site have been highlighted on several occasions, both to the developers and the planning department, who have failed to commission a detailed hydrogeological assessment, which both the developer's own original flood risk assessment and Environment Agency's groundwater specialists have deemed necessary. I'm well aware that the committee's role today is simply to consider the Nord Homes variation plan to increase the footprint size of the houses that are in the process of developing. However, I might add this original permission was only granted on a casting vote on the part of the chair, who refused to allow a number of the committee's members to refuse it because she considered that the developer might appeal, and which might have been upheld. The environment
20 seconds remaining.
Flooding report dated October 23 clearly identifies the increased flooding risk that this variation plan introduces, which contradicts the advice given to the planning committee last year that such additional works would not materially increase the risk of flooding elsewhere. In conclusion, common sense has not prevailed in this development. I do not believe this committee has diligently considered all of the factors in regard to the flood risk of this field, which, despite the introduction of attenuation tanks by the developer, will continue to be the subject of.
Okay, thank you.
Long after the development has left the site. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Could I please ask Giles Meyer to speak?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of this application on behalf of the applicants. As you've heard from your officers, this application seeks approval for amendments to the approved scheme at Frogmore Lane. And as you've seen from the photographs, the Commission exists for some dwellings, and that has been implemented. The requested amendments are both individually and collectively minor in nature. Across the 7 residential properties, proposed amendments result in a total increase of 39.4 square metres. The floor space increase varies across the residential units from 0.1 square metres to 23 square metres. In addition, as you've seen from the plans, the requested increase in footprint has also changed the materials to Unit 6 and a reduction in the roof division of proposed properties. The arrangement of the proposed road layout and position of properties within the site is unchanged from the approved scheme. Given the minor nature of proposed amendments, including a very modest increase in the footprint of properties, as detailed in the officer's report, the proposal will not result in any harm to the character and appearance of the wider area. With regard to the relationship with neighbouring properties, there is no change in the approved layout and no reduction in terms of separation distances or changes in boundary treatments. As such, it must follow there is no harmful impact to neighbouring properties. The increase in site coverage, 39.4 square metres, has been accounted for in the surface water strategy, and updated calculations have been provided. These are demonstrated, again, as set out in the committee report, that the additional footprint will have no impact on the surface water strategy, and the increase in site coverage as well within the storage capacity for the surface water management strategy. The Leeds Local Flood Authority have acknowledged that the increase in footprint has no impact on the drainage calculations and therefore raised no objection to this application. It's been demonstrated that the proposal will not result in increased flooding. The proposal is appropriately flood resilient for the lifetime of the development, and residual risk is safely managed. The proposal, as such, then accords with the NPPF and policy MX6 of the local plan. The application seeks permission to vary with very modest changes and approved scheme for 7 residential units, and as such, the principle of development should not be revisited. Just to reiterate, proposed alterations will not result in any harm to the character and appearance of the area. There will be no harmful impact on residential properties and neighbours, and there will not be any increase in flood risk across the site.
30 seconds. Okay, thank you very much. I ask Councillor Ian Merewether to speak, please.
This parish council strongly challenges the case officer's conclusion in two areas. Firstly, that the development does not increase the risk of flooding elsewhere, and the application complies with relevant national policies, and there are no material considerations which would warrant refusal. This development has been highly contentious. I'm surprised the case officer is not here, frankly, and it stems from the applicant's previous variation request, approved last July by this committee, to now locate two properties to the lower ground on the western area of the site, which has a track record of suffering recurrent groundwater flooding. Please note my distinction between groundwater flooding and surface water. This parish council was deeply concerned that the impact of both the case officer, the applicant, and the local lead local flood authority to properly address the issue of the groundwater risk. So we commissioned a report from the Environment Agency groundwater flood specialist with extensive experience and detailed knowledge of our area and this site. We have shared this report with the case officer and the applicant. The expert's opinion tells us that there is a very real risk that the groundworks and related activity on the two properties located on the floodplain of this site will result in an increased risk of groundwater flooding. This is completely at odds with the case officer's conclusion. You will note the case officer's report references only the impact of surface water flooding in any detail, and the report acknowledges that the western part of the site suffers surface water flooding. It does not acknowledge the reality that in fact groundwater is the primary cause of severe summer flooding on this site. Indeed, the applicant's own flood risk assessment, largely adopted previous and now defunct application, is insufficient. It states that more detailed hydrogeological assessment is required from this site, none of which, to our knowledge, has been undertaken. The NPPF guidance on managing flood risk has frankly been given a stiff ignoring by the LFFA and the applicant, and specifically paragraphs 159, and I'm talking about the new 2023 issue, paragraphs 166, and specifically paragraph 167, where it is clear that there is an increased flood risk elsewhere. And
30 seconds.
The case officer report continues to answer a question about surface water that the authority and developer intend to answer, but it doesn't answer the question that must be answered. We ask this proposal be refused or conditioned appropriately to allow detailed hydrogeological assessments by professionals to address the groundwater flow risk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask Councillor Piers Brown to speak, please?
Chair, thank you for this morning. Just looking at this application, I think for the third time, it won't surprise you that I intend to reiterate comments of many of my concerned residents and highlight particularly the difference between ground and surface water flooding. As highlighted very eloquently by the parish council, there is a distinct difference, and this site has a mixture of both. The Environment Agency's groundwater flood specialist, who actually uses Sixpenny Hanley as a training site for groundwater flooding, has said that this application is dangerous and it increases the risk to not just the future residents, but the existing residents of our community. I note the applicant's solutions that they propose, attenuation tanks. I'm not entirely sure how you store water underwater. I'm also confused that what you will end up doing is the developer makes the money, they leave, and the liability for any mitigation, if you indulge me, we suggest that it's work, is left with the future residents of Sixpenny Hanley to look after. I'm also concerned that the increased inlet rate for Northwest site, which currently takes all of the discharge from the High Street and Dean Lane's highways drainage, has been increased. Now, in principle, a good proposal, but obviously that water then needs to be discharged from the site, which currently happens, as you can see, to the south. So therefore, by definition, is increasing the amount of surface water runoff to outside of the development site. That alone is in contradictions of NPPF section 167 and obviously the Dorset County Local Plan NP6. I therefore would encourage the committee to heed the lessons of King Canute and not try to hold water. It didn't work for him, and I've got a feeling it won't work for us. But the reason I ask you to do that is for the residents that will buy those houses in good faith, believing that we went through due diligence to protect their interests. And when they leave the developments, which the conditions require to be a certain height above the proposed flooding and paddle to the car, which is part of the carriage, I think they may ask some questions as to how this. So I would encourage you to turn down the variation, and I would encourage the applicant to work with the community to find a
30 seconds.
solution. Thank you, Chair. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. I'd just like to ask Hannah Smith to address any points you may like to make. Okay, thank you. So if we can go to questions, I think this time I'll go around the table. Councillor Major, do you have any questions?
Thanks for that. I'm quite confused by this.
Okay. Yeah. Councillor Apothecary.
Chairman, Councillor Val Apothecary, Gillingham Ward. I do recall this application and the deliberations regarding it and our concerns, actually. It's just something that's been highlighted. The drainage scheme, which we spent a long time discussing at the original application. Could somebody tell me where this is? I'm sort of reading that it was submitted, but it's now withdrawn and not replaced. Could anybody please advise me on this? Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Jesperson.
Sorry, the question, the answer. to the
Could go
question,
to
just one from next.
Hannah Smith.
Would it be okay if Alistair answers that question on the drainage?
Yes, could you ask that? Could you answer that question in terms of the flooding?
Yes, thank you, Chair. On the figure that you can see on the screen, the drainage scheme for the site is in two parts, essentially. The first part will collect all the water runoff from the hard surfaces of the development, the roofs, the driveways, etc. And you might be able to see some blue hatching on the development, which are underground tanks. Can you see that? Councillor Apothecary, see? Yep.
Yes, I can.
So all the water will be directed to those areas, which are basically storage tanks, and they're wrapped in a membrane which won't allow groundwater to get in to that. So it will only accept the water from those hard surfaces. And then the water from those storage tanks is released at quite a restricted rate, which mimics the pre-development rate from the site. So the effect is it's like a big bucket with a small hole in it. All the water will run off from the site or from the developed site into that big bucket, and it will be released from the site at a controlled rate, which is similar to what it is now in an undeveloped site. So that's the first part of the drainage strategy for the site, to deal with the development itself. The second part of the drainage strategy, which was approved in 2021 as part of the outline, as was this as well, is the diversion channel, which you can see in green. And I would suggest, well, it's about the first half of the channel, perhaps 2/3, excuse me, which has been diverted. Can you show also the previous path of that? It's in that other picture, in that other figure. It's the in the one you had. Yeah, on the left figure, it's the two tram lines. You can see that's the original path of the channel. And it's been approved to have a more engineered channel to the west of that. And that is to keep the water that goes through the site within the channel and not affect the development. And that, I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jesperson?
Yes, I do have a question, Mr. Chairman. The nub of the thing, really. That we are increasing, this variation of condition is proposing to increase the footprint of the hard surfacing on this site. And we discussed this application in great detail, and we had a very enjoyable time getting to understand the drainage scheme. Now, it seems to me it's counterintuitive to suggest that increasing the footprint of the hard landscaping on this site will, as we've done, will have no impact on the flood risk. I just can't see how it will have no impact on the flood risk. So I need clarification. I think the committee, how can we be assured that this variation of condition won't increase the flood risk? The response from the local flood authority, which is in your report, suggests that there will be an increase in flood risk, but this is they're presuming that this is acceptable because there was some redundancy built into the drainage design scheme, which we accepted. Well, if this extra landscaping on hard landscaping on the site is using up that redundancy, then are we going forward with a scheme, a drainage scheme that has no redundancy built into it, which seems to me quite a high risk strategy, given that there's only one thing we know about climate change is that flooding is going to get worse. So I just need to understand, how is it possible that we can be told that increasing the landscaping on this site does not increase the flood risk? I need to understand that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And particularly about further mitigation in terms of the flooding, if you could explain that for us.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I restrict my answer to the application, which is before us, which is the increase in impermeable area of 39 square meters, that will produce an increase in runoff from that 39 square meters. I asked the applicant to demonstrate how the drainage strategy would cope with the extra 39 square meters of impermeable space, and they reran the model, the computer model they have for the drainage scheme, which you see there. And the original volume of storage was such that there was a redundancy in the scheme. So the addition of an extra 5% of impermeable space and a small amount of runoff didn't require an increase in storage or design of the drainage system. It does already have a redundancy in terms of it's got a capacity for climate change. So it is looking to the future, to 100 years, to say what is the rainfall flooding situation 100 years. So there is already capacity. I think it's either 40% or 45%, depends when this was approved, in addition for climate change. So in summary, the small additional area that this application is concerned with didn't produce a need to actually redesign the drainage scheme for the site. So it's still being released from the tanks at the same rate it was as per the previous variation of condition.
Okay, thank you for that.
Can I have a supplementary?
Just one more supplementary.
Please. So as I understand it, then what we're saying is that we are using up some of the redundancy, some of the capacity that was built in there for climate change and for future increase in flooding. We are using up some of that redundancy capacity to accommodate the extra 5%. And in your view, that would still make this an adequate, because we have not changed the drainage scheme at all to accommodate this extra 5% of, and in your view, that would still be an adequate, or I mean, I want to hear that that's still the view of the experts, that that would be an adequate scheme.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, for what I understand from the drainage consultant, of the applicant's drainage consultant, is that the extra runoff is using a bit of redundancy of the tanks that is not included in the climate change allowance part. When you're designing the tanks, you have to buy specific size tanks, and sometimes they're a bit bigger than you need. And I think it's a case of that in this instance.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask Councillor Rideout, please, to ask a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, Councillor Jesperson has asked exactly what I was going to ask. I am concerned there's extra 5% increase in permeable area. There's 103, going from the report, 103 metre cubes of storage allowed at the moment. This and the 40 square, with the additional 40 square meters, there's 91 metre cubed in total. So there's a 12 metre cube left, according to my calculations, for
yes, is that
for
correct?
extra capacity and climate change, and we all know it's changing rapidly. So that's my worry. We're eating into that redundancy there.
Yes, I think people are looking for that reassurance.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's my understanding that it's not using that redundancy for climate change. That's what my discussion with the consultant is, that it's not eating into that part. So it still has 100-year lifespan, if you like. So yeah, when we look at flooding and drainage for residential development, we're looking at 100-year lifespan. So my understanding from the consultant is that despite the extra 5% impermeable area, the drainage system will still cater for the 100-year event plus the 40% climate change uplift.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Major.
Thank you, Chair. I think perhaps I should have paid more attention in my school science lessons. All I can think of, we've got these underground tanks in an area which we've been shown pictures of by members of the public, submerged in quite a lot of water in the past, not so long ago. When you or I get into a bath, what happens to the water? It goes up. So surely these huge tanks of water that's being stored is only going to push existing flooding and groundwater levels up, even taking into account the experts' forecast with climate change. I don't personally feel I can support that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jones? Oh, it's Councillor Vitale. Okay, sorry. Councillor Vitale.
Thanks, Chair. I think Councillors Jefferson and Ryder got to the nub of the issue, so I'll try and ask a similar question in a more procedural way. We've had really important representation today from Mr. McLean and Councillor Brown. What I want to ask is their concerns, how much they apply to this application, which is for a variation of condition, and how much of them apply to the original application. In other words, we are just looking at what the impact of this potential change in the permission is, and it would be inappropriate for us to reopen the considerations or the debate that was had on the original application.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I can't really speculate on the intention of the speakers, but it seems to be that all of the matters, well, majority of the matters that were raised by the speakers against were to do with the previous approvals that have been granted and issues which have been brought to committee that have been discussed, debated, voted upon and approved previously. But I'm speculating partly on what the intentions of those speakers meant.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Councillor Jones, you have one?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really understand. The previous application has been passed, so they can go on and build that, but I don't actually know how bad or possibly what the situation will be in relation to flooding if they just go ahead with the existing application that they already have, compared to the new application with an increased bill. What I would like to know is whether or not we could defer this for a detailed hydrological assessment. That's what I would like to know, because I think that if we had that, we would feel comforted one way or the other.
Okay, thank you for that suggestion. Is that a possible option?
I think we've already discussed, we're not looking at the principle of this development, and officers are satisfied that the hydrology has been appropriately looked at previously on when full planning permission was granted for the dwellings. So what we really need to consider now are the changes in the VOC, any implications. So we have got an increase in the footprint of the dwellings, but to put that into context, that's about the size of a standard double garage. So you could easily have patios across the site. I'm not an expert in drainage, but it's not so finely tuned that you can not allow for any, changes to hard surfaces around the site. There has to be some allowance there. And as Alistair's explained, this allowance that's within the drainage is not from the extra allowance we need for climate change. It's actually been remodelled already, and the hydrology looked at again through the work that Alistair's asked the applicant's consultant to do. So I don't think that we can go back to first principles and require something that we haven't required on the original application.
So can we say that we are satisfied with the hydrology?
That's the advice.
In terms of your advice?
In terms of the Lead Flood Authority, they're satisfied with the hydrology on the original application and what's proposed here with the details we're considering, which is the small increase in footprint and the changes to the ridge heights through the change to the pitch of the roof and the material changes. They're the three elements of the scheme that are changing. So as Councillor just said, they could proceed and build a very, very similar scheme without any requirement for extra hydrology work.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. Go back to Councillor Vitali.
Very sorry, Chair. In which case, can I ask another question, which sort of builds on what Councillor James is saying? Can officers respond directly to the point that was raised about this distinction between surface and groundwater? Because I think that kind of goes to the heart of this variation condition application. And specifically, are you content that in this report we have covered groundwater sufficiently and the concerns that are raised, that have been raised today?
Okay, Alistair.
Sorry, could you clarify the question, be a bit more specific as to what you want to?
So the case that has been raised by members of the public is that we have failed to take into account groundwater, much as we have taken into account surface water flooding. It's not in the report as I see it that there's a clear distinction, but are you happy that in the assessments that have been made that it has been taken account of?
Alistair.
Yeah, in terms of surface water, there is a lot of information available. In terms of groundwater, there is limited information available because it's under the ground. Now, I know that Councillor Merriweather did make mention of an environment of a report from the Environment Agency that was commissioned, and I have read that. And I'm not sure who, if that was written. It was written by an Environment Agency employee. I'm not sure whether it was written as a resident of Sixpenny Handley, because by coincidence he happens to live in Sixpenny Handley, or whether it was written as an agent of the Environment Agency. But that report was submitted some 3 months after the previous variation of condition was approved. So it was new information on groundwater. but it was submitted to the council long after the decision was already made. So there is new information in there. But I don't think it's relevant to an extra 40 square metres of floor space because the principle of the development has already been approved. But all I can say is there is new information about groundwater flooding in that site. I'll acknowledge that, but it was submitted to the council after the previous approval. Does that answer your
Okay,
question?
thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Mr. Chairman, I'm really concerned about this application before us because it's an increase in floor space, it's an increase in runoff. And as we've been told by, the British Council now, you speak about the 100-year levels and all that, but it seems as though they have floods every 3 or 4 years around their environments. And I'm not happy to approve this myself anyway.
Going back to Hannah, there isn't any way then at all that we can have another look at the hydrology. That's all settled as far as you're concerned. And as a committee, we just need to make a decision.
Yeah, as I said, we've granted full planning permission for the 7 dwellings and they could construct them with all the planning conditions we put on hydrology and flood risk and the channel works, regardless of this application. So what we need to consider is there anything about this application that raises material considerations that would warrant refusal of the application, rather than looking at the principle and going back to the start of the application, because this is a variation of the condition to make those 3 elements of changes to the scheme. It's not to revisit the whole of the application. So, and the advice from our lead local flood authority is that the hydrology would still be acceptable based on the original.
Okay, thank you for that. I think now we need to move to debate. So anyone like to raise a point for debate? Councillor Jesperson, go ahead.
I'm really struggling with this, Mr. Chairman, because as I said, to me it's counterintuitive that what made me uncomfortable is the statement that we've heard that increasing the runoff by increasing the size of the buildings has no impact on the flood risk. And I wish you hadn't said that, because that just stopped me dead in my tracks, because clearly it would. So I will put that on one side for a minute as just not a very helpful way of expressing it. So it comes down to, for me, is the fact that officers clearly are satisfied that, notwithstanding the fact that this is self-evidently going to make the flooding a little bit worse, that the drainage scheme is adequate to deal with it. And we are kind of at the same place we were when we considered this the first time round, is that members are wringing our hands and feeling really uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, we have to take the advice of the officers who are telling us that it's adequate. So, I'm just not seeing anything in here, given that the response we've seen from the Lead Flood Authority and from the Environment Agency and from us. I'm not seeing what we can hang a refusal on, because clearly there is nothing here that no grounds on which we can object, which I'm most uncomfortable with. But that was exactly where we found ourselves last time. So, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Jesperson. Councillor Rideout.
Councillor Rideout, Gillingham Ward. I feel the same as Councillor Jesperson. I remember when this came, I was very concerned about this, and we came to committee first, and there was lengthy discussion. I'm still concerned because it has eaten into that redundancy, and going forward, climate change, etc. I would be more happier if when the tanks were enlarged in some way going forward.
Okay.
Take surface water, but I also know we got experts here who are telling us that the capacity is okay. it's within the capacity for the storage of water. So again, we're in a very awkward position.
Yes, I think that advice is clear. Any other points to be raised? Councillor Vitali.
Only very briefly to say that I agree with Councillor Jesperson. Just like to sort of probably pull my rationale there. It seems to me that the concerns about flooding here are very, very material. It seems that they are objections that are the principle of development on the site, which has already been agreed.
Yeah.
And procedurally, it's not our place to reopen that question. It's to look at the variation of condition. And therefore, as Councillor Jesperson said, there would be very little for us to hang the refusal of this variation of condition upon.
Okay. Any other points to be raised? Councillor Apothecary.
Thank you. Taking into account everything everybody said, I certainly don't feel better about this at all. I can see that, excuse me, we will struggle to find a reason to refuse or any reasons to refuse, although I'm obviously, I don't understand why the variations requested in the first place. I cannot support this. I will have to abstain if we can't find reasons, honest reasons for refusal. I think this particular application, as at the time of the original consent, is exactly the same now. We all feel terribly uncomfortable and responsible somehow or another for future happenings for these residents and the residents that live at 6 Winnie Hanley. We do have a responsibility, don't we? And I cannot support this application. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any possible proposal going either way? In other words, support or go against this application? Oh, yes, sorry.
Thank you, members. I think we've all expressed we're in exactly the same position as we were with this application last time. And so the legal advice to you would be that there aren't any grounds being put forward for refusal. I think everybody here, we've seen the evidence that's been put forward and from speakers that this site does have a problem with flooding, and we're having to trust in models that aren't on the ground for us to be able to see that they do work. And so that's obviously the nervousness. But we would need to have some material grounds for proving that what has been put forward here will not accommodate the very small increase in built area. So I think if we cannot find those grounds, then we do need to consider moving forward for approving this variation.
Thank you. Councillor Major.
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder if perhaps this could be deferred so we as a committee were given a viewing of these models that would perhaps satisfy us that there is no risk to the future residents and the existing residents of that village.
I wonder whether that might be possible, Hannah.
The site already has been modelled for flooding, so it's not true. I know that there's a more in-depth analysis that's wanted by the parish council, but there has been flood modelling of the site, which Alistair will be able to confirm. Can I just pick up on one point on the site, the changes resulting definitely in an increase in flooding? I think there's a difference between an increase in floor area resulting in additional runoff and result in additional flooding, because if the flood drainage system can accommodate that increase, it isn't an increase in flooding, it's just an increase in runoff that can be dealt with through the drainage strategy. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, okay, thank you. Any other points? Anyone on the committee? Councillor Jesperson?
Very, very reluctantly, Mr. Chairman, because I think we're going round in circles here, very, very reluctantly. I think I have to propose that we accept this application. And I say reluctantly because it just feels most uncomfortable, but we have no grounds on which we can refuse it. So to move us on, I would like to propose.
Yes, okay, thank you. Councillor Rideout.
Councillor Belinda Rideout, Gillingham Ward. Yes, very, very, very reluctantly. I will second that proposal and I hope this doesn't come back to bite us.
Okay, thank you. I'm aware that Councillor Jones may want to say something.
I just wondered whether we could have a couple of minutes to discuss whether we could find any grounds for refusal. Could we just say whether there are those grounds? But as a proposal has been made, we have to follow that through.
We'll go, what we'll do now is we'll vote for the proposal that's been seconded. So please could everyone vote with a show of hands? Those who are in favour? So I see 1, 2, 3, 4 in favour. Those against? I see 4 against. So it looks like a tie, so. And abstaining. So I'm going to have a casting vote and I'm going to vote in favour. So therefore, this is passed. That is P/VOC/2024/01076 has been granted planning permission changes they want to make. Okay, thank you everyone for that. Councillor Pothecary.
Could we have a coffee break, then, please?
I'm thinking actually, perhaps now might be a good time to have a lunch break. So do you reckon, I think we should take half an hour now.
Just 10 minutes.
10 minutes?
Fabulous.
You sure? 10 minutes? No more than that then. We're back in 10 minutes. That's The next agenda item is number 9, the 4th planning application of the 6. This is application number WD/D/20/003259. That's land north of Wanchard Lane, Charminster. It's being presented by Alex Skidmore. It's a request for outline planning consent to build 30 dwellings. It's been brought to the committee as the parish council has concerns. There is one speaker registered for this application. Alex, could you please go ahead with the presentation?
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. So this application, as you say, it's seeking planning permission for 30 dwellings. It's a full planning application. So it's also, just to bring everyone to up to speed with the progress of the application. It was started as an application for 41 dwellings. It's been reduced during the course of the application through negotiations to address various matters. And so it's now 30 dwellings that's being sought on this site. Before I progress with my presentation, there's just one update to give committee members. So as part of the recommendation for approval, a sum of money to contribute towards affordable housing provision. In the report, that's stated as £32,430. Actually, that was based on when it was 41 dwellings as a proposal. And now with the reduction in numbers, that sum also has been reduced and that actually should now read £21,218. And that sum has been derived from our adopted calculator. Thank you. So this application is often dubbed as phase 4, Charminster phase 4. So on the screen before you can see where the red line site is for the proposed development. In blue, just to sort of the west of that area on the south side of Wanchard Lane, it's outlined in blue. That's the previous phases. So phases 1, 2 and 3. And that will become relevant as I go through my presentation. On the next slide, it just shows the application site again, shown in red. I'll put my mouse on there because on the big screen, it's not abundantly clear. So where my mouse is, that's the application site. The black line denotes where the development area is for Charminster, and that's the adopted development area. So the application site actually sits outside of that, as noted in the report, as did actually the preceding phases. You can see to the southwest of that site, just again where my mouse is here, that's phase 1, 2 and 3. They also sat outside the development area. The next slide, again, just a little bit more context. Again, you can see the site in red, and the blue area to the east and south is where the conservation area is. It's dotted in blue. There's also a number of listed buildings close by, which is sort of to the southeast. It includes the parish church and Hayden Farm. There's some public rights of way as well, which will be relevant for my presentation. So you've got one where my mouse is here, running north to south. These are perhaps some of the most important views as you look across the conservation area towards the site. And certainly that will feature in a moment with some of the photographs I'm providing. There's also a public right of way that runs alongside the west side of the site, just outside the site area, just here. So the submitted layout plan as it currently stands for the scheme of 30 houses. So there's a generous area of open space. The open space that's quite strategic where it is as well on the site, and particularly in the middle of the site. And this was in response to some of the concerns raised from our landscape officer and heritage officers to reduce that overall massing in terms of how it would be seen in views looking from the conservation area and across the conservation area and to wider views with the A and B beyond. Submitted landscaping scheme. You can see, hopefully, just make out the red line area on the plan. There's an area of dark green planting, just trying to get my mouse back in focus. Here we go. This sits outside the site area. This is an area of copse, which you'll see in some of the photographs in a minute. There's quite a lot of existing planting as well that goes around the outer edges of the site, mature hedgerows, some additional trees within it, including along Wanchard Lane on the southern side. And then quite a lot of additional planting that will be put in as well as part of the scheme to mitigate views and to buffer it as it's seen from the wider sort of village context. At the bottom of the screen to the southeast here, that is number 15 North Street. It's set down, it's outside the site area, but it is set down and dug into the slope. Just to mention that, because that's probably one of the properties it's sort of most affected, if you like, by the development in terms of neighbouring properties. So moving on to some of the sections that have been provided. The top one it gives an indication of the topography of the land. It is sloping, particularly from west to east, gets steeper as it progresses east across the site. And as it gets towards North Street, you can see where my mouse is here. That's number 15, where I've got my mouse here now. Number 15, you can see how it's set down from the site area. Actually, if I bring it down, sorry, that's number 15 here. You can see how it's dug in. There will be an area of open space to separate it from the wider development, and particularly built form, just to preserve its amenity. But you can see from those street scenes, it's quite a pleasing variation in designs and roof forms, very much trying to match in with the earlier phases. Move on from that, and then some final sections. This is one going north-south across the site. Sort of as you first go into the site from the entrance here. And these are some affordable housing properties. Actually, I did forget to point that out in the previous slide, so apologies, I will just go back. As part of the schemes, 30 houses, 10 of which will be affordable units provided on site. They are to be situated here in the southeast corner, and they will be put in one area just here, as you can see with the red stars. So moving back along through my presentation, just a little bit more in detail as to some of the designs of the property. This is plot one as you first come into the site from Wanchard Lane. You can see it's quite a nice, pleasing design. It's a curved frontage, quite a lot of effort's gone into its appearance. Provision of slate roof and stone and brick detailing, again, which is reflecting what was on the earlier phases. An example of one of the detached properties. This is a 3-bedroom detached property. Again, nice sort of Dorset references within the design and use of materials. These, some of the affordable units, these are actually some flats that are being provided as affordable units. So you can see that they've been designed to have every appearance of being houses. So you wouldn't know that actually they're flats at all. So they should sit in comfortably and shouldn't be identified as affordable units. So the next slide is an overhead, and this is in reference to some of the mitigations being put in from a highway perspective. So the site outlined in yellow, obviously access is onto Wanchard Lane itself. Now, to the eastern end of Wanchard Lane, it emerges onto North Street. That is a substandard access junction. So as part of the scheme, it's proposing to alter the flow of Wanchard Lane. There's a number of residential properties just located east of the access to the site. Their means of access will not be altered. They will be able to come and go both in the east and westerly direction and have full use of Wanchard Lane as such. For anything that sits west of those properties, including the site, they will only be able to gain access as they come from an easterly direction. So that includes site traffic and all the commercial traffic that sits to the west of the site. That includes the council depot just in here, and other commercial development as well, just sitting in down here. And just to point out, as part of the earlier phases, you can see a dotted line coming down from Wanchard Lane down to the A37. That's a new link road that's been provided as part of that development. It's not yet in use, but it's very much being built out, and it's going to be there and available for use for future traffic. So how that will be achieved, there will be a raised table just east of the site access, which is now shown on the screen. So raised table and a narrowing of the lane, and anything west of that point will not be able to travel in an easterly direction. So that will take traffic, including commercial traffic and the site traffic, away from use of the substandard access in terms of emerging traffic onto North Street. There'll be other improvements as well. So the substandard access I'm just referring to, that's shown on the screen. So there will be improvements to that junction, Wanchard Lane onto North Street, in terms of realignment of that junction to improve traffic speeds, to slow things down and improve pedestrian connectivity as well. Few photographs now. So this is looking east along Wanchard Lane. The site is on the left-hand side, and that's the existing frontage you can see with the vegetation growing there. Stood within the site, looking in the northerly direction, you can see, get some impression, very sensitive mouse, of the boundary treatment with the trees and the hedgerows. Currently it's a bit of an overgrown site present. This is looking south, stood in a similar position, south towards the conservation area. You see there's a little bit of a crest, and then it dips down towards the conservation area. This is number 15 North Street I referenced previously earlier in my presentation. So this sits immediately alongside North Street and is dug down into the slope of the hill. And this area will be given over to an area of open space, landscaped open space, to preserve their amenity. Looking northerly from a similar spot, that's the coppice of trees that sits outside the development area. And then stood in North Street within the conservation area. This is looking up towards the site. That slither of land behind the first lower hedgerow is a neighbour's garden, and above the second hedgerow is where the application site is. Again, there will be an area of landscaped open space before there's development. So there's a little bit of buffering again in terms of how that will be seen from North Street and its level of sort of visual presence. Views, other sensitive views. This is taken from the church, parish church graveyard, looking out towards the application site. So the application site would sit between Hayden's farm here, which is listed, and just sit in here. You can just see the top of the land here, where the site would go. So this is only shown just for the next slides, which are photographs of views looking back towards the site and how it's seen in the context of the conservation area from wider views and the AONB. So you can see these yellow spodges here. That shows where the public right of way is and roughly, crudely, where the next slides or photographs are taken. So this is at the northern end of that public right of way, looking southwest across the village. So in the dips where the conservation area is, you can see the yellow arrow denoting where the application site is, just in here. You've got Poundbury beyond Avenue AONB. Walking a little bit further to the south, it does become a little bit more exposed as you walk south along that footpath. You can see the rooftops of the previous phases sitting in there, and again, the conservation area below. That's just a wider view looking around. You can see that other development has crept up the hillside further to the north. There will be this green gap preserved, however, between the development site and where there's other development further to the north. And then again, that's just further to the south again, just to give you an idea of what the visual presence will be. So in summary, the application site does lie outside the defined development boundary. However, it is considered to be in a sustainable location in terms of access to services. The development can manage its own water runoff. It's not located within a flood zone, and it's not considered to increase the risk of flooding elsewhere. The development does not pose any increased risk in highway safety or cause any severe impacts on the local highway network. It's considered that future occupiers of the development will benefit from an acceptable level of amenity, as will neighbouring properties. The design of the proposal is considered to be of a good quality and should sit comfortably alongside existing development. The reduction in dwelling numbers and building heights with the addition of the landscape planting is considered sufficient to avoid harm to the character of the village and surrounding landscape. Less than substantial harm to the setting of the adjacent conservation area has been identified. However, this harm is considered to be outweighed by the public benefits of the proposal through the provision of additional housing, including policy compliant level of affordable housing. Overall, the proposal is considered to represent a sustainable form of development that accords the development plan, and there are no material considerations which would warrant refusal of the application. The recommendation is therefore to grant consent subject to conditions and the Section 106 obligations as set out in the report and amended at the beginning of the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Alex. We have one speaker, Tim Hoskinson. Please, could you speak?
Application in front of you today is for phase 4 of the successful Chelmsford Farm development. Earlier phases have provided a community hall, allotment, display area, open space, landscaping and highway improvements. Phase 3 is almost complete, and granting consent now for phase 4 would allow construction to roll forward, supporting local jobs and housing delivery. The application comes before you today after a process of amendments, refinement and improvement that's taken place over several years. When we first consulted the local community, our plan showed 52 houses. This was reduced to 41 after pre-application advice, and since down to 30 homes as we've worked closely with officers to amend the plans in response to consultation and planning. Site is identified as a housing allocation in the Dorset Council local plan consultation of 2021, and before that was a preferred option for development in the West Dorset local plan review of 2018. It's important to note that the site forms part of Dorset Council's 5-year land plan. It is included in the annual position statement that Dorset Council has submitted to the planning inspectorate, which shows the site is delivering new homes within 3 years. The site itself is surrounded by development on 3 and a bit sides. It's well related to the village and it's got good access to local services and facilities. It has been sensitively designed to respect its setting. Almost half of the site is dedicated to green space with a large central public ring overlooked by new homes. Set back from the edge of the site to protect the existing trees and hedgerows, and also allow space for new planting, creating a green backdrop to the development and providing that gain in biodiversity. By design features 1.5-storey homes in key locations to nestle into the hillside and reduce their visual impact, and the design details reflect the character and appearance of the village. Proposing a balanced mix of housing to meet local needs, including much needed affordable homes, carefully designed and well integrated to be indistinguishable from them. New homes would be energy and water efficient, incorporating renewable and low carbon reducing technologies, vision for electric vehicles.
30 seconds.
Drainage systems. A package of highway improvements will reduce traffic movements in the direction of Blanchard Lane and North Street, by the safer environment pedestrians. Overall, this is a carefully considered and well-designed scheme, in keeping with Chelmsford and will deliver much needed new homes. It would also provide continuity to Chelmsford farm development, retaining skilled crafts and local tradespeople, associated benefits and increase the local economy.
Thank you. So I'd like to go around asking committee members whether they have any questions. I'll start with Councillor Major.
No questions, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wood.
No questions.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Jones.
spaces. Is that, but then it also mentions some communal spaces. So are there 5 visitor spaces all in all, or are there more visitor spaces?
Alex.
Apologies, I'm going to have to just looking at the plan so that. Apologies, Chair.
No, no
Looking at
worries.
the plan, there are 5 visitor spaces. They're provided by the bays. You can see at least 4 around the area of open space. You've got an area of communal parking in this area where you've got the affordable housing here. But the visitor spaces do sit separate to that, or the majority of them do.
Sorry, so the communal parking, is that allowing 2 spaces for each of the affordable units only, or are there extra spaces within?
Actually on here.
Yes.
Without having the plan in detail, but my understanding is that each of the affordable, they'd be treated just like the open market in terms of having 2 parking spaces each. But in terms of how it's actually distributed exactly in that corner, I can't see whether there's an additional visitor parking space added in there without a magnifying glass. Apologies. But there is that quota, and it does meet the needs as set out in terms of our highway colleagues and policy.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vitali.
Just a very brief question about the conservation area. Is the rest of the Chancellor Farm development within the or within or outside the conservation area? Was the conservation area got past the formal local plan where the documents are in? I'm just trying to work out how much weight to place on it, because otherwise I see it's like a very well thought through, very sensitive proposal.
Go ahead, Alex.
Thank you. So I brought up the plan again. That's off Explore Dorset, which anyone can get access to on the public website. The blue dotted area is the conservation area. So in terms of phase 1 to 3, that sits to the west here and goes up Wanchard Lane, roughly where my mouse is. As you can see, that sits out and away from the main body of the conservation area. Technically, the current application site also sits outside, but it does actually adjoin the conservation area in this instance. And obviously that conservation area, yes, that's adopted through the local plan. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jesperson.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have 2 areas just to ask some questions. But the first is the affordable housing. I noted the affordable housing, it's policy compliant, which is excellent. Thank you for that. But it's not very well pepper potted. It is all clustered, which is something that we try and resist if we can. Can you tell me why we've had to settle for that?
Yes, go ahead, Alex.
Thank you. So whilst pepper potting is something we do try to aim for, in terms of having them in a group, that's not necessarily something that we're adverse to either, provided they're of an appropriate sort of scale of grouping, so that it sits in amongst the wider development and it sits there comfortably. It doesn't stand out that this is the affordable area, so to speak. So, and in this instance, because of the design of the properties, it is considered that they should sit in there comfortably, and they should be, I think it's called tenure blind, in terms of if you visit the estate and you don't know, the tenure, that you shouldn't easily identify that those are the affordable. There are some benefits actually for housing associations as well, that actually having small groups, they do quite like that. Maintenance and things like that keeps costs down. It makes it a little bit easier for them as well. So there are some benefits too.
Thank you. Thank you. My
Okay,
second question, which is slightly more complicated, just because I did try and follow it, but I just need you to explain it to me briefly one more time. It's about the arrangements, but the traffic arrangements. I'm missing Steve Savage again. Can you just put that aside again? Explain to me again where the traffic is going to go and why.
Yes, please.
Okay, right, I shall do my best, and as I miss Steve as well, so there we go. Right, so actually, if I go up a slide, so on the application, on the screen there, you've got the application site in yellow. The access comes out of the southwest corner of that site onto Wanchard Lane. Okay, so this next slide shows where that access is. And east of that access, you can just see here where my mouse is, that's going to be a raised table. So the lane at that point will be narrowed as well. So it's down to single file traffic. And it's at that point where effectively Wanchard Lane becomes one way for any traffic that sits to the west of that raised table. So anyone coming into the village on the A352, they're still at liberty to turn left into Wanchard Lane and approach the application site and approach the commercial premises that sit neighbouring to that. But what they can't do, once they've passed that raised table, they can't then go back the same way they've come. They will have to either use the new link road or carry on down the lane and connect back to the A37 further to the west. That will remove traffic then from that Wanchard Lane North Street junction in terms of, obviously the sensitivities here, because it's about this visibility displays being so poor, so merging traffic, it's not a particularly safe junction. So that will remove an awful lot of traffic existing, and obviously any new traffic means that they won't be able to egress back onto North Street where there's that substandard junction. So that will improve the safety of that junction.
Okay, one
Can
more.
I have a follow-up? So, thank you, that's helpful. I get it. Is there a danger then that we've displaced some of this traffic now then onto the new link road that we're building? And it is because I thought that was running through the other development. Is that link road, are we happy that we might be displacing some of this onto the link road? And is the link road being designed to cope with that?
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
The answer is yes. Obviously, this is all form part of negotiations with our highway colleagues. So careful considerations gone into this. And yes, that new link road has been designed so that it can take that type and level of traffic. So it's very much being accepted by our highway colleagues, and that this will form an improvement to the existing situation.
Thank you.
Is that link road to be considered as part of the development as such?
The link road forms part of the earlier phases. So
okay.
Whilst it's not directly tied in with this, it kind of forms part of that wider plan, if you like. So but it's already in place, albeit not yet technically open for use. So.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Apothecary.
Thank you. Councillor Jesperson asked my question.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor Jeans.
Councillor Jesperson also asked my question. So.
Councillor Rideout.
I don't have a question at this stage, thank you.
Excellent. Councillor Cooper.
Can I ask, will the link road be adopted by Highways Authority?
Just go ahead.
My understanding is yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think that's the end of questions. I think we can now move to debate. Would anyone like to bring up any points? Councillor Rideout.
Linda Rideout, Gillingham Ward. Just like to say, I think this is very well thought out design, quality design. It's well screened. I like the idea of the affordable looking like normal houses, so they're indistinguishable. It's part of a phased development. There will be less than substantial harm to setting the conservation area, but I think when you're looking through from there, the development will be seen in the context of previous phases of development. So all in all, I'm quite happy with it, and I'd be happy to propose.
Okay, thank you. Any Councillor Major, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree with Councillor Rideout's comments. I'd be happy to second that.
Okay, thank you. Comment from councillor Jespers.
Just to comment and say, I concur with that. And I'd also just like to acknowledge the fact that what we've got here is a development that is carefully designed, and the materials and the design and the look of it are well chosen, well thought out, maps the vernacular, and which is of course what we come to expect from Wyatt Homes. And you know, it's always gratifying to see before this committee something that we can be proud of, because that's not always the case.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So please could we go to a vote? So if those could vote in favour by raising their hands. That to me looks pretty much unanimous. So this planning application has been passed, which is WD/D/20/003259, land north of Ranchard Lane, Charleston. So, okay, thank you, everyone. I'm conscious of the time. It's now 12:30. It's 2.5 hours. Now, on the whole, would people like to take a break now or vote to extend? Vote to extend. Does everyone agree? Yes, go.
Can we just have a show of hands vote?
We carry on. Okay, fine.
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, could I just suggest, because we're nearly at the 3 hours, are we allowed to take the vote to continue on beyond 3 hours now? Otherwise, we'll have to interrupt ourselves.
Yes, we can take the vote now,
Yes.
so that's
So
okay.
I so propose.
Therefore, we'll go ahead
Yes.
with the next application. Yes, have we taken that vote for the record,
Yes.
Megan? Thank you. Okay, this is agenda number 10. It's application number 5. The application is P/2021/02623. 4 Paddocks Lane. It's land south of St George's Road, Dorchester, represented by Alex Skidmore. On this application, details of the consent is to be modified, including nutrient mitigation measures and removal of permitted development rights for 1 plot. It was brought to the committee as it was previously discussed and agreed by this committee. There are no speakers registered for this application. Alex, please go ahead with your presentation.
So I will make this very quick unless numbers instruct me otherwise, but I'm not going to go through my full presentation like I did previously. It is exactly as it says at the very beginning of the report in the agenda. So the application is completely unchanged from before when it was presented to committee in July. The only thing that has changed is that modification to the recommendation, and that is in response to the change in nutrient neutrality and how that mitigation is delivered. Previously, it was agreed that it would be through SIL, and that's our adopted stance. That has since changed, and sorry, SIL, by which I mean Community Infrastructure Levy. That has since changed. That changed at the end of July. So now developers are obliged to come up with their own solution. In this instance, the developers has agreed that they will obviously meet all their mitigation requirements, but instead of going through SIL, that they will do that through nutrient credits. So you may or may not be aware that Natural England have come up with a credit scheme, and they've recently released their first sort of lot of credits. So and that's how the mitigation measures would be met in this instance. So as I say, recommendation is exactly the same as before, but with the addition of committees condition to remove permitted development rights for plot 75, and then the addition of a condition to secure the need to for that mitigation through the credit system. Thank you.
Okay, and also there was permitted development rights for 1 plot, wasn't there?
That was Yeah, that was part of the committee's resolution last time to add that condition on. So that is actually added at the end of the report. So that's all the relevant conditions are on the report as.
Okay, thank you. So if I can ask committee members to put their hands up if they have any questions. No questions? Oh, one question, councillor.
So why are we moving the permitted development rights? We discussed that. It was on that spot.
I'll show the next slide, just see. So the sites at the eastern side of Dorchester, plot 75 is, if you can see my mouse, right at the bottom southeast of the screen here, or bottom right of the screen. That's the closest plot to Maxgate, which is grade 1 listed, and it was all about safeguarding potential sort of enlargements of that plot that might further sort of threaten the settlement of Maxgate. So that's why that condition was added.
Okay, thank you for that. Right, sorry. There are 2 local ward members for this one. So I'll ask councillor Jones if she would like to make any points.
Carol isn't the local ward member, it's councillor Stella Jones, but neither of the local ward members have wanted to make a representation.
Oh, okay, thank you for clarifying that, Megan.
Rory, not
okay. Yeah, councillor Major, have you got a point?
Thank you. I have no problem with this. You know, we talked about it last time. I'm not sure I agree with Natural England's solution for this, but that's what it is, and I'd be happy to propose we accept.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anyone who'd like to second? Okay, councillor Jack Jeans is going to second. So please could we go to a vote by show of hands for those all in favour? That again is unanimous. So
Right.
this application P/FUL/2021/02623 for 4 Paddocks Lane has been approved and granted planning permission. Now move to agenda 11, which is the 6th and last planning application.
Okay.
This is the application number P/2023/01413. It's land between Linden House and Rose Cottage, Ravering Lane, West Gillingham. Presented by Stephen Banks. This is a request for outline planning consent to build 2 dwellings. Occasionally referred to this committee as Gillingham Town Council has concerns. There are 3 registered speakers for this application. When you're ready, Stephen, please go ahead.
Thanks. I'll just get the sharing bit done and all set. Okay, can everyone hear me?
Okay, go ahead.
Right. The application is for the erection of 2 dwellings with associated parking and amenity areas and a new vehicle access. The application is for outline permission and approval is being sought for the matter of access only. And the site address is land between Linden House and Rose Cottage, Wavering Lane West, Gillingham. And the site is here within the red line. And the Linden House is to the west of the site and Rose Cottage is to the east of the site. This shows the existing site survey again. Linden House is here to the west and Rose Cottage is here to the east. This is an indicative site plan which shows the 2 dwellings, garage in, turning and parking area, amenity space, and the access is here, proposed to be sited there, and the blue dashes show the visibility display. This plan is a tree protection plan. Trees of note are here to the left of the proposed access and also here in the neighbouring property. And this slide shows the application site, which is here, agricultural field to the rear there, and again, Linden House here to the west and Rose Cottage here to the east. This is zoomed out further and shows the application site here. In relation to the centre of Gillingham is something which is worth or should be noted. The Gillingham train station is here. The centre of Gillingham, obviously, as we're all aware, runs along here approximately. And the settlement boundary is the area highlighted in yellow here. The application site falls outside of this settlement boundary. And this shows the footpaths nearby to the site. The site would be visible from this footpath, N64/65. And this slide shows the National Cycle Network, which runs past the application site and into Gillingham. And this slide is looking towards the site, looking west from Wavering Lane West. And where the arrow is there, that's the approximate location of the proposed access. And the trees that were noted earlier are pretty much there. Again, this shows the location of the proposed access. And this is looking towards the site, looking west from Wavering Lane West. That's Rose Cottage here on the right-hand side, and the site falls within that area there. And this is looking northeast, and the site is here on this side of the road, and Linden House, part of the property, is on the left-hand side here. And this slide shows Linden House on the left-hand side, and the site would be there further along the road. And this is looking east from the proposed access. So Rose Cottage is that property there. And this is looking west from the proposed access. And this photograph shows the site from the agricultural field to the rear. It pretty much falls within that space there. This is taken from, this photograph is taken on the edge of the site. That's looking towards Linden House. This area here, where there isn't any crop planted, is quite closely resembles the proposal site. And this is looking in the opposite direction towards Rose Cottage, again, where the crop ends, or the grassland is pretty much the line of where the boundary would finish. And there's another photograph there. The proposed access would fall approximately here. And that's from within the site looking towards Linden House. Oh, sorry, Rose Cottage. And that's looking the opposite way towards Linden House. That's looking out from the site across the fields to the rear. And again, to the northwest within the site. And the key issues are the principle of development, living conditions, character and appearance, highway safety, and biodiversity. And the recommendation is to delegate authority to the head of planning and the service manager for development management and enforcement to grant, subject to conditions which relate to approved plans, the commencement of development, reserved matters, biodiversity, access construction, the construction of manoeuvring and parking areas, bicycle storage, entrance gates, the visibility display area, and finished floor levels. And that concludes my presentation, Chair. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. John Robinson to speak.
I'll just close the meeting, but I'm going to go now so I don't interrupt the deliberations, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Firstly, I reiterate the comments and support for Harry's comments on the letters of objection. Whatever the argument is, most important, this proposed development, which is the third application on this site, is outside the settlement boundary, resulting in the loss of productive grade 3 agricultural land. Policy 20 of the North Gloucester Local Plan states that development can only be permitted if there is an overriding need for it to be located in the countryside. This need has not been demonstrated. The purpose of settlement plan is to restrict development of the open countryside. If development on this small farm field is approved, then I would suggest that this will set precedent for further development in other parts of this field, as was attempted previously, reference application number 292. But i.e., if this were approved, there can be no valid reason for refusing further applications and give way to development of farmland from the back door. It is worth noting that the application I just mentioned was development of one yard fronting onto Waverley Lane, west at the northern edge of the sale field. After appeal. With reference to the planning statement, two properties that were identified as relevant are not, since they were both built within the residential coverage of the adjoining property. The only relevance to this application is the refusal for the change of use from agricultural land to residential extra land purchased for a larger garden. The planning statement, reference paragraph 5.2, states that the development will not affect the living conditions enjoyed by the occupiers of adjacent properties. This is absolutely not true. Rose Cottage was rebuilt on the footprint of the original 17th century farm workers' cottage and is therefore unusual in its orientation, such that the rear of our property, i.e. our main living spaces, lounge, kitchen, dining, bedrooms, will directly face proposed development. Squeeze this oversized development into the plot of land, the buildings are positioned high up against the boundaries of Rose Cottage and Linden House, and will be extremely overbearing, intrusive.
30 seconds.
It would have a significant adverse effect on our living conditions and is contrary to policy 25 of the North Gloucester Local Plan. In summary, I reiterate my comments and my neighbours' comments in our letters of objection. Most importantly, it is outside the settlement boundary and does not comply with the development. It is building on agricultural land classed as open countries. I'm aware that highways have no objection, however, the proposed entrance is positioned on the narrowest part of Waverley Lane West, which is barely 1 car's width. The proposed development is an overdevelopment of the site that does not reflect the loose knit and spacious characteristics of the settlement pattern in this edge of town location. It's extremely overbearing, intrusive, and overshadowing. Gillingham Town Council has recommended refusal, and I would suggest they are ideally.
Your time is up.
Best development needs to the town. Public benefit proposal does not make sense for community and sufficient housing options placing once should be outweighed by the negative impact of the environment. Does not.
Okay, could you please stop speaking? Your time is now up, but thank you anyway.
And it does not address affordable housing.
Thank you very much. Could I ask Matt Williams to speak, please?
Speak on that with planning consultant partner group the agents. First, I'd like to commend Mr. Banks' report and recommendation, provides a very comprehensive and assessment of proposal in the context of current. We heard this application seeks outline planning permission with only access to the approved stage. All other matters reserved for subsequent approval. The site is indeed outside the settlement boundary, but it's immediately adjacent to it. You'll know settlement boundary was carried over from the 2003 development plan, and officers have confirmed that further housing needs to take place beyond existing boundaries to meet the required amount of housing. There's actually a report by Henry Jordan, Service Manager for Spatial Policy, which is on Cabinet next week, which is in respect of National Planning Policy Framework changes. And that also confirms that in light of direction of travel policies, the council are not going to be able to demonstrate a 5-year housing supply for quite some time. That's what it says in Hillary's report. Mr. Banks confirmed that the site is in a sustainable location due to its relationship with boundary, existing properties and local facilities can be reasonably accessed without to drive. The proposed development, we hope you agree, represents a logical infill between two existing dwellings. Linden House to the west, which you saw in the photos, developed in the early 2000s, and the proposed dwellings will therefore be seen in the context of relatively new housing development. You also heard from Mr. Robinson and Rose Cottage. Importantly, this site does not represent an important gap in the main neighbourhood plan. County Highway Officer has confirmed that the access is safe and suitable, and the biodiversity team have issued a certificate of approval for the biodiversity plan to achieve biodiversity gain. And Mr. Banks confirmed there are no adverse impacts that could significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. And I therefore sincerely hope you will grant our permission as recommended. Just finally, in response to a few points by Mr. Robinson, obviously each case is considered on its merits. So considering this infill does not open the floodgates of the field. Previous applications were refused in the 90s, were in a different policy context. The layout is illustrative. The nearest dwelling to Rose Cottage is shown approximately 15. The layout is not fixed. The amenity can be considered.
30 seconds.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. Please could I ask Councillor Barry Von Clemens to speak if they're here? I can't see anyone else actually. Okay, so we'll go ahead with questions. We'll go around the table. Councillor Rideout, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Jeans.
Yes, just at the back of an objection. It says in 2011, the previous owners of Linden House requested planning permission to extend its eastern garden boundary by 6.1 metres. The 2011 application was rejected by the council planners on the grounds that the development encroached into farmland, which would cause harm to the prevailing rural character of the locality. So my question is, what's changed now?
Okay, thank you for that question. Stephen.
They're definitely quite different applications, obviously. This is seeking the provision of accommodation or residential dwellings. The other application was seeking the extension of a garden into the countryside. And there's obviously the need for housing is different to the need for someone to extend their garden primarily. In terms of appearance, it's definitely considered at the moment that it wouldn't harm the character of that part of Gillingham. I would suggest is definitely the consideration.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Apothecary.
Thank you, Chairman. No questions, but I would like to kick off the discussions when you're ready. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Questions?
Questions, Councillor Wood.
I have a question.
Have you got a question? Please go ahead.
Thank you. Just more specifically look at the access for this. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then as illustrated there, that's the proposed access road. Okay.
That's correct.
And that's been assessed by Highways, and they've said that according to them, is safe and is appropriate for that location.
Yeah, the Highways officer was satisfied. Yeah, they did recommend conditions. I'll confirm the conditions.
Okay, Councillor Major, do you have a question?
I'm
Still waiting for
Yeah,
Steve.
sorry, I'll just
Are
confirm
you
the
just looking
conditions
it up?
just for clarity. The highways officer didn't object to the application, subject to the imposition of conditions which related to, I won't be a second. Oh, I just scrolled up a bit in my report. Sorry, a second. Sorry for the wait. Here we go. So no objection, subject to the imposition of conditions relating to access, construction, manoeuvring and parking areas, cycle parking, gates, visibility displays on any permission. So that was the highest officer subject to the imposition of those conditions on any permission which being recommended. He did consider the scheme would be acceptable in terms of the impact on highway safety.
Okay, thank you for that.
So there's a variety of things that they've mentioned there that are they indicated on this image, like all the stuff that is conditioned there.
They base their assessment on the plans that we've seen. Yeah.
And the conditions they're saying they're happy with that.
Yeah, the blue dotted line and that access position is what they were considering, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Major?
Question?
Okay. Sorry, could I just ask Hannah, I believe she has a point to make.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to clarify the land supply situation at the moment, because there's lots of different points that have been raised about land supply. And to be honest with you, it's not a simple situation at present. So I just wanted to outline where we are in terms of the North Dorset plan area and the 5-year housing land supply. So the site for planning policy purposes is within the countryside, so it's outside of the settlement boundary, albeit on the edge of one of our most sustainable settlements. It is for planning policy purposes in the countryside. So our published land supply for the North Dorset plan area is 5.02 years supply. Subsequently, we had appeals that showed that the land supply was below 5 years, recent appeals where it's actually been said to be below that and not as the stated published figure. So they're all snapshots in times, because it will obviously change because we have completions and we have, you know, different housing developments coming forward and lots of good progress there. But there is doubt about our published figure and actually being able to demonstrate the 5.02 years. We're also looking to fix our land supply potentially, and we've submitted to government an annual position statement on our housing land supply. That housing land supply looks at Dorset Council as a whole, so the whole area. And the evidence we put forward is that it's just over 5 years, so it's 5.2 something, I can't recall exactly, but over 5 years. Obviously, that goes through a consultation period, and lots of people have made representations on that. So we do not consider at this point in time we can attach significant weight to the annual position statement, especially because the government are actually consulting on removing that provision from the NPPF as well. And also there's talk about having much increased housing targets. So all of that put together means that we're left with the situation at the moment of our published supply of 5.02 years, but current appeals that have shown it to be below that. In that context, we're looking to, as Stephen pointed out, approve development in sustainable locations where there isn't demonstrable harm. And this is the situation in terms of policy that we presented today to you. So that just gives you the context. So the starting point for decision making is the development plan. Then we need to look at those material considerations. And that's why it's slightly different from the garden application, because our policy for garden land says that there shall be no incursion into the countryside in terms of residential curtilage. So it's a slightly different policy consideration, but a very good point raised. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. So can we move on to the debate, whether anyone has any proposals? Councillor Apothecary?
I must say, in spite of Mrs. Smith's, Hannah's statement, to be honest, I'm surprised that this application is recommended for approval. As we've heard, there have been 3 planning applications on this site, going as far back as the 1987. They've all been refused for the same reasons. As far as I can see, this application is no different from the others. In planning terms, it all comes down to the principle of development. It is outside of the settlement boundary, and therefore it doesn't comply with the development plan. There are no exceptional circumstances and no material considerations to warrant a determination contrary to the development plan. In fact, consent to develop this agricultural site would be against NPPF, the local plan, and the Gillingham neighbourhood plan. Members will be well aware of the huge agreed extension to the town, and spades are already in the ground in order to achieve this growth, which, when finished, will expand Gillingham's current population by around a third to 16,000 people. So there is no need for speculative infill of more green fields outside the settlement boundary. Contrary to the agent's planning statement, a 5-year housing supply can be demonstrated, and the presumption of the tilted balance does not apply. So I would ask members to give this very careful consideration before just nodding it through. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rideout.
Linda Rideout, Gillingham Ward. I would mostly concur with my colleague, Councillor Pottercary, what she said. I've known this lane for a long time. My aunt used to push me up and down there in the pram. And things have so changed since then. There's been building on both sides and development, but mostly in the curtilage of residential properties. Now we're looking at an application to take some land, agricultural land, outside the settlement boundary. That grates against me, and that grates against policy 20. It doesn't meet the rural need. It's not an overriding need, as my colleagues pointed out. We've got 2,000 houses being built south of the town. So I would be opposed to this application and principal development. As to the access, well, highways have said it's okay, but it is in a very narrow part of the lane with high hedgerow. So I am opposed from the principal development.
Okay, thank you. Any other points? Okay, Councillor Wood.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with my colleagues as well. I mean, Gillingham is not shy of development. We have a lot of development going on. I don't think anyone could say that we're kind of trying to shut down development in any way. I just think this is a bit unnecessary, really. And it doesn't really fit in from what I can see in any way in that area. We have a lot of other areas getting developed, and that's more than enough, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Jesperson.
Sorry.
Yes, absolutely. I'm opposed to this application on the principle of development. This is not an appropriate site to be building 2 houses. It's outside the settlement boundary. The justification we are given for why we would be putting a development on agricultural land that is contrary to policy is that it's providing housing. Well, Gillingham has 2,000 houses coming down the line, so that justification is not very robust. I think it's we have the 5-year housing land supply. I understand exactly what Hannah said about it's up for discussion. The housing land supply is always being challenged and up for discussion, but as we've been told many, many times in this committee over the previous 5 years, on the day when we sit here and make the decision, we have to discuss the 5-year housing land supply that it is on that at that moment, not what it's going to be or what it used to be. And as we sit here, it's 5.02, so the tilted balance does not apply. So I can see absolutely no justification for going contrary to policy to put 2 houses outside the settlement boundary. There's no case being made for this, and I would like to propose that we refuse this on the grounds that it is contrary to policy and that it is detriment, and it's using agricultural land, and that there is no material considerations that would outweigh the policy consideration. And that's just off the cuff, and I'm sure that if you give me a minute, I will approve on those grounds for refusal.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'll just let Hannah have something to say.
You're looking, there is a conflict with the spatial strategy, and that is correct. You do have to make sure we properly consider material considerations that might indicate that development should be granted, and there is a significant need for housing, and that is illustrated and it's explained in the NPPF. I think in terms of the conflict with spatial strategy, I just caution adding in loss of agricultural land, because when you look at the aerial photography, it's clear that this part of the agricultural land isn't ploughed in the same way as the yeah, I'm just a bit concerned at an appeal situation that we would be able to justify the loss of the agricultural land, but it does come into the fact that it's a greenfield site outside of the settlement boundary, and it's conscious of the spatial strategy rather than a loss of productive agricultural land, which I think might be more difficult to justify appeal in a appeal situation.
That advice, then we will.
Okay, thank you.
Drop the agricultural land bit and say that it's contrary to policy and contrary to the spatial and it's a greenfield site.
Okay, thank you, Councillor
Could I second the proposal, please?
Sorry?
Could I second the proposal to refuse?
Okay, yes, you can, of course. So please, could we put this to a vote?
Chair, could I give you some
So,
words?
sorry, we
Probably
have another point to be raised by
I've
Hannah.
got something that I've drafted, but please, councillors, tell me if you're proposing if it's the site lies on a greenfield site outside of the settlement boundary of Gillingham. The site is not allocated for housing development in either the adopted local plan or more recent Gillingham neighbourhood plan. Proposed development would not meet local identified housing needs, nor represent a type of development that would be appropriate in the countryside or otherwise have a demonstrable overriding need for a countryside location. Development of the site would therefore represent an unsustainable form of development contrary to the spatial strategy of the adopted development plan, specifically policies 2, 6 and 20 of the North Dorset Local Plan Part 1, 2016. It would also conflict with paragraphs 83, I have to check whether they're correct, those numbers, the NPPF. And I would just, a note of caution, obviously, please do, when you're thinking about this, the material considerations of the fact that our land supply is not certain at this point in time. And we do need to consider those material considerations when we're considering housing in locations such as this, which is a sustainable settlement.
I think your point is that this could be challenged. Could go to appeal.
Appeal, yes, and all those material considerations that I've outlined in terms of the uncertainty about our land supply, the need to deliver housing, the benefits of the two open market dwellings is a small benefit, but it is still contributing to our land supply. We'd need to be sure, that that's an appropriate course of action to take to appeal, because we are looking at the moment to where we don't have demonstrable harm, allow development in sustainable locations to try to ensure our land supply is robust. As I said, it's 5.02 years for North Dorset at the moment, but that has been successfully challenged and knocked down to 4.8 something years. So you can see that they are snapshots, but it's material in terms of what inspectors would consider at planning appeals.
Okay, thank you, Councillor.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you, Hannah, that's brilliant. Just to say on the question of appeals, everything we do here is subject to appeal. The point is we have to do what we think is right, and we can't not make a decision because it will be subject to appeal. Otherwise, there'd be no point in coming here. I would like to propose, Mr. Chairman, that we refuse it on exactly the words that Hannah has given us there. Hannah, thank you for that. I couldn't have put it better myself.
Okay, thank you. And we have a seconder. Thank you. Please, could we have people vote in favour of this proposal, which is to refuse planning permission?
The proposal to refuse.
To refuse planning permission. I count 7 in favour, those against, 1 against. So this planning proposal has been refused. This is P/2023/01413. The detailed proposal will shortly be out. And is that all done, Hannah, as you wrote it?
Yeah, that would be minuted and the refusal.
That'll be minuted. That's done. Okay, that's even better. Okay, so back to the agenda. no urgent items to discuss in item 12, business. So I therefore declare this meeting closed at 12 minutes past 1. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time. Thank you. Thank you all.
Chairman.